Hello and welcome to another edition of F1 Hour. With me as always, my friend and yours, the legend, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever have goated, the one that they call Peter Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing very well, Cam, and you?
Good man. I'm better than I deserve, Mr. Windsor. Better than I deserve. There are very many F1 centric threads at which we need to pull this morning, Mr. Windsor, on the back of a dramatic, cinematic Mexican Grand Prix. As is customary, Mr. Windsor, I'll ask you the first question this way. What do you think was the biggest story to come out of the Mexican Grand Prix weekend?
Well, that it was such a dramatic race, cinematic race, as you correctly say. There I was. I'm not sure if I was the only one out there doing it. About to set up my reruns of Doc Martin to have in the background because I thought it was going to be the most boring race in the history of boring races. I watched the first corner and thought, well, no, pay attention here. And it got better and better, didn't it? And the last bit of Max versus Charles was captivating viewing. Again, a reminder that you don't need a lot of overtaking for it to be brilliantly cinematic and a great motor race, which it was. And it's a great shame about the whole VSC right at the end. It was kind of predictable, though, wasn't it? And it had all gone so perfectly in a way that something was bound to go wrong at the end. But no, great. And it was great that a lot of good guys had a lot of good results too, didn't they? I mean, great win for Lando. Never drove better in qualifying or the race. First corner, off the line, just fabulous. And wonderful driving from Charles and Max. Oliver Berman, what a star, and so it goes on. But a lot of very good performances, and that's always good to see. Yeah, the big question mark again over Oscar and McLaren, and no doubt we'll be talking about that as the show develops. But overall, yeah, just a bit of a shock that we should never be lulled into thinking this is going to be boring, and because things going to happen in Formula One, you can never predict.
Anything, per the immortal Murray Walker, anything can and usually does happen in the weird and wacky world of F1A. Mr. Windsor, let me ask you the first question this way.
Yeah.
Lando, I've got to bring myself to the truth pulpit because I've said some things over the past couple of weeks. I didn't think Lando had the minerals, that as brilliant as he is when he's had his Weetabix, that we see that level of brilliance far too infrequently. This weekend, he made me eat my words, and I've got to take 10 seats. PT was brilliant, as near as makes no difference, every minute of every single session. Do you think Lando Norris is now the favourite to win the championship in 25?
We've predicted so many things, and they've never come. I mean, I predicted from the start of the year that Max would win it, so I guess I still have to go with that. But you ask, is Lando the favourite? I'm sure he is amongst all the bookmakers and all the cognoscenti out there, as Murray Walker used to call them. I think he is the favourite. Undoubtedly, he's the favourite. He's got the big smile. He's got the momentum. And when you see him on days like this, you think, how can there be any other days? He's that good. And it was wonderful to see. Obviously, the big question is Oscar, and whether Oscar can again be the real Oscar Piastri. Would he reappear on the stage or not? Or will this sort of second version of him, which is not particularly quick, remain until the end of the year? I mean, he's been saying at the end of his little interviews, well, I'm sure I'll get it right at the next race. Looking forward to that. We'll be back in the old speed again. And he's been saying that for 4 races now. So, it's time to. Well, it's not only it's overdue for him to be back being a racing driver again.
Well, what do you think's going wrong with Oscar, Peter? There's a lot of chat about him underperforming by dint of his driving style at low grip circuits, that he doesn't look after the rears as well of a smooth, flary Lando Norris. Do you think that's what we're seeing over the past couple of Grand Prix? And do you think that will continue over the next 4?
It's an interesting observation. I mean, I've said from day one that Oscar definitely has a touch and a feel to be very, very good. And I think we saw this in his first year at McLaren. And then he's kind of, his rate of progression as a driver seems to have stalled. Now, whether that's just looking at too much of Lando's data and effectively on the days when Lando's having a good day, Oscar then thinking, well, I'm going to have to do the same thing if I've got to compete with him. I think it's probably that. And I think that's dumbed down his own natural flair. Flair's the wrong word because it implies oversteer and smoke coming off the loaded rear. Not flair. It belies his natural feel for the surface of the road and doing what he wants to do with the car. And also there's the other issue of, do McLaren want to have two guys saying different things about the car as well? So he goes with the flow. He's that sort of guy anyway. And what we've got is a dumbed down Oscar who's now, yeah, I would say on low grip circuits, it's showing up his fallibility more than on high grip circuits, because he is turning in late. He is braking as late as he can, and he is trying to get the power on as soon as he can. And he is worried about minimum speeds, and that's minimum corner speeds, and that's not good. You're not going to progress if that's your platform. That's Liam Lawson's platform. You're never going to progress from that. You're going to become more refined at what you do, but you're never going to become a driver at another level, a Max or a Charles, to be blunt. And that's effectively what he needs to be to beat Lando when Lando's on it. And I say that because I've never said anything other than Lando has a wonderful touch, beautifully seamless transitions from straights to corners. My only comment I've ever made about Lando is that I just think he needs to start pushing himself to get into corners earlier and shorten the corners, and then he'll be even quicker. He's got the feel and the touch to do that. But nonetheless, as he is right now, he's incredibly good. And there's never been any doubt about that. It's just maybe there's been some mental things coming in along the way. But to beat that, Oscar has got to raise his game. And yes, he's had days when he's looked very superior to Lando. But in reality, they've been days when Lando's not got it together for whatever reason. And so now it's push comes to shove time, and we need to see Oscar raising his game. And it won't just be, if he just tries to continue doing what he's doing, but tries even harder and goes to the gym even for another hour, it ain't going to work for him, in my opinion.
It's chaos, this, Peter. I never thought I'd see over the first 9 races so metronomic and even-handed was Oscar in his performance. I didn't think I would ever see, this season at least, the extent of the drop-off in form that we're seeing from Oscar. And then I suppose Oscar Piastri fans all around the world would be concerned by 2 things. In the first instance, the fact that he's never gone well around any of the next 4. I mean, he's 8th and 8th in 2023 and 24 respectively at Mexico. Brazil 14th and 8th, Las Vegas 10th and 7th respectively. Qatar's done fairly well, 2nd and 3rd, but Abu Dhabi 6th and 10th. And then you overlay with that the growing suspicion that Zach Brown and McLaren have their favourites, and he has a name, and his name is Lando Norris. To that, Peter, you respond how?
Well, I mean, that's an obvious point, and we've been saying that from the start. I've been saying it from the start, that the curious thing about the whole issue is that if Lando is the chosen one and has been for many years, why would they want to put Oscar Piastri alongside him? Why not just keep Daniel Ricciardo and keep it smooth and natural? And had they done that, Lando would be even more ahead he'd have more points than he's got now, let's put it that way. So yes, of course they want Lando to win. I think they feel it would be better for the company. Lando deserves it more. He's got the big smile, as I say, and that's great for McLaren. But if it works out that Oscar's the world champion, that's good for McLaren as well. And I guess somewhere along the line, they seem to be ready for that as well. But yeah, I think this is, if you look at Oscar's decline, it started in Baku and it's never really recovered from there. And it was sort of accentuated by the events of Singapore. And he never seems to have recovered from that. It looks like he's just mentally down about the whole situation now, whatever that situation is. And as you point out, it's probably that he's just feeling like the lost one in the team, as Mark Webber used to feel at Red Bull, interestingly enough. And I think that was really shown in the race yesterday, because I've no idea how McLaren made that decision, but to me, the logical decision was to start Oscar on medium tyres, put him on a different strategy for Lando, because he had to, from Oscar's point of view, he had to beat Lando, had to try and take the race to Lando. He's in the same car, and potentially he could do that. But they needed to give him something different, because it was never going to work on the same strategy. He was just going to get locked into a DRS train, and that's what happened. The only way he was going to do it would be prolonging a stint. And if Max could make the mediums last as long as he did in that first stint, then for sure Oscar could have done even better with him, because he's in a better car, a much better car. And there's, if you look at it in isolation, there is a lost opportunity for McLaren, because had they done that, Oscar could easily have been on the podium. and he wasn't. Now, why didn't they do that? That for sure they would have thought about it. They would have discussed it. And my opinion, it's only my opinion, is that they just didn't want to get in a situation at this stage of the year where they've got two drivers on when the strategy call is relatively marginal. They didn't want to do that and split them, because if they did, the driver with the preferred strategy would, particularly if it was Oscar, would upset the balance of the politics too much. And I think that's what happened. I think McLaren tightened. I used that word yesterday. They just tightened in the way they made their decisions. And I think it would have hurt Oscar yesterday. But having said all of that, if Oscar had qualified better and he was right there alongside Lando or ahead of Lando on the grid, then none of this would have happened. Oscar would have, I'm sure, would have had more power to have taken a different strategy had he wanted to. And that's the problem. He's not qualifying well. Well, he's not driving well. Bottom line,
yeah.
That's it.
And is that the biggest concern, Peter, that when you hear Oscar debrief his qualifying performance, he's like, well, he uses words like, well, it was a mystery. I don't understand why I'm 6/10 off of my teammate who's driving the same car.
Well, it is. It's a big worry, and I don't know the inner workings of his brain, but I do know that throughout his career, Mark Webber was not a fan of driver coaches being able to do anything for the makeup of a driver. He felt that racing drivers were racing drivers, and you were born with that talent, and you got more experience as you went along, and you honed that experience, as Mark did really well. But you don't need someone telling you how to drive. I personally disagree with that, and I always have throughout my life, because I don't see why racing drivers, athletes, if you like, are any different from other athletes on the planet. All of them need coaches 24/7. So, I never really understood that about Mark. And I do think that had Mark done some work with, say, a Rob Wilson at various stages of his career, I think his career probably could have gone on an even stronger path. But that's beside the point. But it does suggest that maybe, Mark has instilled that in Oscar's way of thinking, and maybe Oscar's like that, and he just thinks, I just don't understand it. I mean, for a driver not to understand is very worrying, because there's a massive amount of data out there, we know that, but the reality, as Rob Wilson's been saying, is that the worst thing you can do in many ways if you want to develop your driving is look at data and look at the digits. You look at what's between the digits, and it's all about feel for the surface of the road and track. And Oscar shouldn't be thinking about it. It should be completely natural to him. And I think that's the problem. He's thinking about it too much now. And there's too much pressure from people saying, why aren't you quick? Why aren't you quick? And then he looks at Lando's telemetry and doesn't understand what's going on. And he's going around in circles. He needs to go back to fundamentals and become Oscar Piastri, feeling the surface of the road, driving very naturally. And that's what needs to happen, in my opinion. That isn't going to happen in a Formula One car. That's going to happen in the rain or the cold or the semi-wet in some obscure circuit in England in a road car with a proper person next to you saying, why are you turning in at this rate? Why are you releasing the brake pedal pressure at this rate? And it's showing up in a road car. And then Oscar would benefit from that. He'd understand it immediately, I'm sure, and he would get it. But I don't think he'll ever do that, because I don't think that's the philosophy of his, of his racing management.
He said quite specifically, Peter, that he's not going to change anything.
No,
he's gonna...
Well, I mean, that's the safe default answer, isn't it? I'm not going to change anything. And what can I say? It's 4 bad races, isn't it? Is it 4 bad races he's had?
I mean, yeah. And probably another 4 upcoming potentially.
Well, sorry, just before we get on to that, I mean, that business of looking back at previous performances, I'm not a great fan of that, because the cars are so different from year to year. And you could say, well, the McLaren was a quick car last year, it's a quick car this year. Yeah, but the tyres are different for a start. The curbs are going to be slightly different. The surface is different. And I don't think it means anything that he hasn't been quick or had good results at the same circuit, last 4 circuits. I don't think that means anything at all, because it only takes a feel in the car for the circuit to be completely different in the mind of a racing driver. And often you see drivers with a terrible record suddenly winning. And, the sort of back page newspaper pundits used to covering horse racing or football or whatever say, he regained his form. It's nothing to do with that. It's just to do with the feel of the car and the feel of the surface of the road and the grip of the tyres. And as I say, the tyres are different. So many things are different. You can't even compare it with last year. So that doesn't mean anything to me at all. But what does worry me, not worry me, what intrigues me, I suppose, is that he doesn't seem to have a methodology of how to improve as a driver. And it is a scientific thing. It's a scientific thing that should be done in steps and numbers and auto-suggestion in your brain when you're doing the lap, in terms of what you need to do on every specific part of the circuit, and how you adjust your feel and your rates of input to what's going on. All that's a science, and within the realm of it being a natural thing. But he doesn't seem to be going that way, and I think it's a obvious example of information overload in terms of data and trying to work out what's going on.
Talk to me about Lando getting booed, Peter, because I know you're not a big fan of fans reacting that way. A lot was made about it on the Sky Sports F1 broadcast, which gives more credence to the favouritism at McLaren theory and Sky. He was asked, and the post-race presser was Lando, what did you make of the booing? And he said, well, listen, they can do what they want. To which another journo followed up with a question and said, well, they can do what they want and they will. And the reason why you're getting booed, Lando, is because Mexican fans, as diehard as they are, Julio Cesar Chavez, they like their sports stars to be real men, etc., etc. And there was a poll that went out in the Mexican press about Lando, and they feel that Lando has been gifted at the very least 3 points because of the inversion that McLaren instructed at the Italian Grand Prix. What do you make of that, Peter?
Well, I stand by what I say. I don't approve of that booing, and there's a very good example of why I don't. It gets out of hand, because why would you boo a driver who's just won the race from the pole from start to finish? I mean, that is just churlish. It's stupid and it's infantile. And it's completely inappropriate. I don't care if the Mexicans or any other crowd, it's just completely wrong. I mean, it's an example of it getting out of hand. And I got to say, I don't watch Sky, obviously, but if Sky are saying that they thought it was out of order, then they are, they are definitely guilty of being incredible hypocrites, because who is it that is out there rah-rah-rahing the European crowd to do what they did against the Americans in the Ryder Cup? Sky love all that. And here they are suddenly, their guy Lando, I presume, getting booed, and they think it's terrible. And that's wrong. That's just hypocrisy. So there should be no booing, in my opinion. And that's normal human behavior of respect for one another. I don't agree with it. And I think that's a very good example. I thought it was absolutely appalling. And I lost a lot of respect for the crowd there for doing that. It doesn't matter what you feel about a driver. If he drives that well and puts on a display that complete, you don't boo him when he gets out of the car. It's ridiculous. And yeah, obviously Lando's been gifted some points, but he could argue, well, if they hadn't signed Oscar, how many points would I have now anyway? It's not his fault in a way. It's Zach Brown they should be booing, maybe, if they want to boo somebody. It's not Lando Norris's fault. And so that's, it's just ridiculous. And it made me sick, actually. And it was at that point that I did actually turn everything off and started to watch some Doc Martin, which was a lot more interesting.
Peter, I concur. It broke my heart to see Lando borderline in tears after kind of rising to the occasion all weekend. He'd been brilliant. He nailed the start, which I never thought he would do. Yeah. He was incredible. But on the flip side of the thing, one of the reasons why Lando and Charles and Max get paid so much money is because we are in the monetization era of Formula One. It is Netflix's Drive to Survive, and there is an ever thinner line, shades of grey, between F1 as a sport and it becoming sports entertainment. And so I think there is I don't make the excuse for it. It shouldn't happen, but I understand why the fans and the footballification of Formula One, isn't it, Peter? That there are more fans here who weren't here in yesteryear when it was maybe more respectful. So I understand. I think that's the why, not an excuse, but the reason behind it.
Well, I'm sure you're right, but it doesn't make it correct. And as I say, Sky are guilty as any other entity on the planet of fueling spectator, reactions, negative and positive. And so that's where it has to stop. And it's a question of whether you want to look at this from a financial point of view and say, well, it's inevitable, we've become this huge cinematic event and we need booing and we need cheering, we need all this, or whether we're talking about human behavior and respect for the rights of others. Personally, I think the latter is much more important than anything else on the planet. And so therefore, it's not an excuse to say, oh, well, this is just because the sport is now so big and it's a sign of how healthy Formula One is. Because, money and size is not actually a measure of progress as human beings. And this is a negative thing for me, to see huge numbers of fans booing a driver who's just led a race from start to finish from the pole. I think that there's no way that can be called positive.
Bravo. I concur. Let's talk about the FIA. Since you spoke about progress, Peter, there's one entity in F1 that feels like it's done anything but progress, and that's the FIA, the regulatory body of $1 billion enterprise in Formula One. Two instances happened, one probably more serious than the other, at the Mexican Grand Prix, that I think are worthy of note as far as the regulatory body and the way that they institute for the rules and regs in a way that's consistent and fair. In the first instance, Liam Lawson is driving fairly quickly on track, and there are marshals in front of him picking up debris. And in the second instance, you get the climax for the race. We've watched 68 laps. We're ready to see a proper gunfight in Charles versus Max, an onrushing, fire-breathing dragon in Max Verstappen, competing in earnest for a championship. And then we get a virtual safety car for a Carlos Sainz car that's parked well clear of the track. What do you make? What is wrong with the FIA, Peter? Why do we keep getting these moments of stupidity?
Well, because we don't have Charlie Whiting running the race. That's why. And ever since Abu Dhabi 21, with Michael Massey making that massive mistake, Formula One have gone into a knee-jerk overkill reaction, massively bureaucratic on tiny details that don't matter, and overlook on very important points. All a function of, we don't really know how to do this, so we'll build up a lot of committees and get more people and try to cover every base. But it comes down to the usual thing in Formula One. It's a very different activity to banking or football or darts or running an art gallery. It is about people who've been doing this most of their lives, who walk into the pit lane, sniff the air, and can immediately feel what is about to happen next, or what should be done in order to react to what is going to happen next. And the FIA is not comprised of those sorts of people. It's comprised of people who've come from all sorts of walks of life, who are very, very good in their own box of ability, but are not racers. They're not actual racers. And that's the problem. There's no broad picture. Charlie Whiting was a gearbox mechanic. Then he was a chief mechanic. Then he was Bernie's guy. And then he became a very, very good race director with Herbie Blash alongside him. And then that went, sadly, with Charlie's passing away. And the best thing they could have done was get Herbie Blash in that job, in my opinion, straight away, pay him a lot of money, whatever it would take to get him away from bikes. They should have got him into Formula One. And now we've got these sort of committees and people, and sort of simulations of what can happen. And all the things you're talking about are little things that have slipped through the cracks that were never there before, because it was an autonomous Charlie Whiting event. Sorry, Bernie Charlie Whiting event. And that's where we're at. And I'm not sure how it can ever change now. There are Charlie Whiting clones in the pit lane, but they're all Formula One people. They're people like, Jonathan Wheatley, Alan Permain, people like that with real racing brains. They could also be very good race directors if they wanted to. I'm sure they don't, because they don't want to work for the FIA and they want to just be doing what they're doing. They want to go and win Grand Prix. As my old Uncle Jock used to say, I'm the only man capable of running the country and I'm much too busy at the moment. And that's right. That's what Jonathan Wheatley would say. And so it goes on. Christian Horner probably, well, I don't know. I'm not sure about Christian. I think he'd be a little bit more, wishy-washy, but you need somebody who'll just call a spade and get on with it and not be afraid to make a mistake. That's the point. Nobody wants to make mistakes. And so and there's one thing you didn't mention there, which I thought was a foul up as well. And that was that ridiculous bollard that they had at the apex of turn 2, which appeared on Saturday morning. What was that all about? And if you look at the race director's notes, it's just there as a picture at the end of the notes and no explanation of why they've done it.
Insanity.
Was it that they're all watching the interview I did with Mark Slade, where he pointed out that Carlos Sainz had a really, really good trick that he used through the apex of turn two, and nobody else could do it. Nobody could, not even Charles Leclerc could do what Carlos Sainz was doing there with the Ferrari, and it was totally legal, and he wasn't damaging the car, and nobody could emulate it. Oh, we better stop that then. We'll put the bollard there. Was that what that was all about? I don't know. And they've got those lumps of concrete now there to I don't know what that is either, just damage the car. Why not just, they've got the track limits thing. Why do they need to put those big lumps of concrete there? Big globs of orange concrete on the apex of those corners. Looks, they're always going on about, well, they're not always going on about it. They're trying to make the Grand Prix circuit look as beautiful as possible, with all the electronic gizmos you can have for sponsors' logos, and yet they put these big blobs of concrete in the middle of the apeces. What's that all about? There's so many inconsistencies, and that's the problem. As I say, with Charlie, you basically knew where you stood, and when he didn't want to make a decision, you also knew that as well, and you knew you had to sort of take a gamble on whether he was going to then jump on your back 3 weeks later or not, if it was a technical thing on the car. But they don't have that now, and that's why we're in this situation. There's no point in going on about it, because Bernie actually created it by fueling the Jean Todt presidency. And this is a sort of fallout from everything that happened post-Max. And there you are, ain't going to change. Yeah. Unless they decide not to be policed or organized by the FIA and become a separate entity like NASCAR. And Formula One has its own administrative body and has its own people. That's the only way it will ever change. And I don't think that will change, because I think Liberty and, well, the commercial rights holders, whoever they are, but Liberty in particular, probably like the look of being run by the FIA and this third party adjudicator. And that's part of it, So I don't think that'll change.
But what if it's no longer Liberty, Peter? I'm hypothesizing and speculating, of course, but what if in the not too... I only say this, Peter, to say this because I remember watching John Maloney interview, and he spoke about Liberty's structure being sufficiently complex to where any sale of F1 would, for tax purposes, be too detrimental to the bottom line. And in order to sell, they'd need to do all the restructures and almost siphon off F1 as its own separate entity, again for tax purposes. It feels like over the past 12 months, steadily, one by one, as far as entities. First it was Live Nation, that's been spun off. There are all these spin-offs to where now they all of a sudden have this separate entity where it's F1 by itself. It feels like they might be teeing up a sale potentially over the next 6 to 12 months. Do you think if they do that, then that the FIA, the solve with the FIA spinning off and doing it all themselves potentially becomes much more likely?
Wouldn't it be wonderful if the teams bought Formula One as an internal buyout? Wouldn't that be cool? That's what we need, actually. That would get us back to grassroots, whatever. And the Liam Lawson episodes wouldn't happen, I don't think, if they did that. But everyone would need to take a cut in income. And of course, that's anathema to most people these days in Formula One. So again, that is unlikely to happen. That's what should happen. Formula One should take control of itself again, in my opinion. Beyond that, I can't offer an opinion, because who knows what they'll do with it. If the teams said to a new buyer, let's say it's the Saudis, and the teams all sat down with the Saudis in some massive conference in Riyadh and said, we don't want to work with the FIA anymore. We want to administer our own sport, and we're going to set up our own administrative system. It's potentially possible, I suppose, that the Saudis are so green and so unused to what Formula One is all about. They might say, oh, well, if that's what you guys want to do, go ahead. They might well do that. So that could happen, I suppose. But it would take a lot of work and effort and time from all the team people to make that happen. And I don't think that any of them want to devote that amount of time and effort to it. They just want to get on and get the bills paid for next month and build a decent racing car.
Yeah. It's all change.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the problem is Formula One is a capital-intensive sport. Without the money in advance, in effect, the sport doesn't exist. Whereas most of the other sports in the world, just about all of them, okay, America's Cup, slightly different, but most of them are all prize money sports based on results, not based on competing first. And that's why Formula One is structured the way it is. That's why we have so many races, because that's the only way they can guarantee the money at the moment. When you look at the sponsors on the car, there's less and less percentage of the money coming from team sponsorship and more coming from race appearances. Yeah. And that's that's why we're at where we're at, and that's another reason why you want a third party administrator, because logistically it's so difficult with that number of races, isn't it, to have a team? But I suspect ultimately the FIA is still probably underfinanced and probably need more money for all the stewards and the marshals and the people that they want to have at a very professional level at every race. And so maybe it behoves Liberty stroke the teams to put a larger percentage of their income, or any percentage of their income, into financing that for the FIA.
I mean, maybe, Peter, to push back on you constructively, maybe the FIA would have some more money if Mohammed bin Sulayem wasn't flying around the world on his private jet all the time, expensing that to the FIA, and therefore reducing their bottom line. But I digress. These are things about which I shouldn't speak. Peter, can I ask you about Max? Because I saw Max, I thought it was a good drive from Max yesterday, but I felt like initially he lucked out, that it was that the circuit, that the racing gods were looking down favourably upon him, that he started on maybe the wrong tire. I know you disagree with this, but maybe a different tire to what everybody else was on around him. And then in the second stint, he puts in lap after lap on those soft compound tyres. It's 121.3, 121.4. As near as makes no difference. Each of those 37 laps are around 121.3, 124, 121.4 on average. I listened to a couple podcasts and people are talking about that Max Verstappen drive as if it were the best Max Verstappen drive that they'd ever seen. That final stint in particular was just otherworldly. To that, Mr. Windsor, you respond how?
Well, for one thing, he did more homework than any other driver in that weekend prior to the race. He was the only guy to run the medium and the soft on full fuel, with fuel in the car on Friday. And he was the only driver to do a fuel run on Saturday in FP3. Nobody else did. So there's a lot of data and a lot of advantage he's already got. Okay, it didn't help him in qualifying. And yes, one of the big mysteries, for sure, is why he was so slow in qualifying on a tyre on which he was obviously pretty comfortable back end of the race on light fuel. But having said that, I don't think it was that much of a gamble to put him on the medium at the start. Don't forget, they don't really know what the others are doing. They see it when it comes up on information before the covers come off, but they don't know when they make the choice. And so Max and Red Bull had no way of knowing who else would be on mediums. And I think they were probably delighted when they saw everybody else around them on softs, because where was the downside for Max? The chances were he was going to be locked into some sort of DRS train, sort of position 4, 5, third, whatever, unable to do anything, and slow, and the race pace therefore wouldn't be great. Yes, he would be in traffic, which is detrimental to the tyres, but nonetheless he could do some lift and coasting, and he could look after the tyres and do those things well that he always does. And then potentially, maybe the race would come alight. They didn't know how long they could run on that soft tyre, but they had a feel that maybe they could do it as a one-stop strategy based on the data they'd done and that very good long runs he'd done. Admittedly, both long runs were on mediums, but he didn't run the softs for that long. But it was clear that the track was evolving and that the car potentially was better on the soft than the medium, because the medium, they were just getting hot, and there's not much you could do about them. This is one of the strange things about the two compounds that were used effectively by Pirelli in Mexico. Forget about the hard, because it just never got a look in. But the medium seemed to slide more and go off more than it should have, and the soft was a really good race tire. So I think he made the right choice, and I don't think it was a difficult choice to make, given where he was on the grid. If he'd been on the front row on the pole, I'm not sure he would have done that. I think he would have started on the softs. But where he was, it was definitely the right way to go. The big question then was whether they could make it a 1 or 2 stop race. And obviously the preferred option was a 1 stop, because there's a pretty good chance everybody else will be making 2. Not necessarily Lando, but the others around him. And so that behoved him then to make that first stint last as long as possible. So when people say the second part, that second stint was one of the best he ever drove, I would say, yeah, could well be, but I would say think about the job he did on the mediums in the first stint, where he wasn't that comfortable, and everything they tried, the diff, this and that, nothing worked, to the point where Max just said, nothing's working, I've got no grip. And he just sort of said that, like, stay off the radio now, let me drive this thing. Because, and that, that's Max saying, this is terrible. And he extended that stint longer and longer and longer. He probably wanted to come in 10 laps probably before he did. And yet he didn't really fall off much in lap time. Right at the end, last lap, it was sort of going off the cliff. Yeah. And that was the bit where you saw Max Verstappen at his very, very best, extending that stint on mediums so that they could get into the right tyre delta for the soft tyre. And he did that. And then the next thing was being as patient as he was in the first 5, 6, 7 laps on the red tyre and not pushing it too hard and just letting it come in at the right way. He was doing a massive amount of lift and coasting in the first 5 or 6 laps on that soft tyre, and yet still he was quick. He was really quick, and he was looking after the tyres. And he was saying, "Can you give me more power?" Because he wasn't going to start using the tyres. And they kept saying, "Oh no, Max, just live with mode 6 at the moment." And that was absolutely brilliant, I thought, the way he was using the tyres there or not using the tyres and how quick he was. And then when they said, "Okay, Max, go now," bang, he was off. And it wasn't sliding and wasn't doing this. He was just obviously then braking a bit later, less lift and coast, whatever he needed to do. He was in charge of the car himself. And that was the result, 0.4, 0.5 seconds a lap on Charles Leclerc. And wow. Obviously helped because everybody else did what Red Bull expected them to do and made their second stop because the medium was so bad and they had to go back to the soft again. But by then, Max was far enough ahead for it not to be a problem. And if you think about it, his soft tyres were only 10 laps older than Oscar Piastri's. That's how good his medium stint was in the first part of the race. That's the staggering thing about it. Only 10 laps. Yeah, you could say, well, that's a lot. Well, it's not that much, actually. And obviously it was enough for him to effectively, he would have been second. And that's great. That was a brilliant drive by Max. And it was all technical stuff of managing the tyres and just remorselessly catching Charles. I would finish by saying, don't forget how good Charles Leclerc was, though, under that pressure, seeing that gap coming down, knowing the number of laps there were in the race, knowing that he was going to be on your tail on the second last lap in the DRS, and yet still no mistakes under high-speed, heavy braking. You're talking 300 and whatever it was, 330 kilometers an hour down to second gear with Max right on your tail. Your yellow medium tyres have lost all their grip, and Charles was absolutely perfect. No lock-up, just braked as late as he could, and it wasn't enough for Max to be able to get past. I think any other driver there, Max would have got him even before the DRS thing, under braking. But Charles was so good there. I felt the one thing I really, the two things obviously, one was the the yellows and the virtual safety car thing. Just it was a bit like Abu Dhabi 21, wasn't it? And then the other one was just as Max was about to catch Oscar Piastri, and we thought, wow, it could be a race here. They bring Oscar in. The lap that he was 2 world championship contenders. We thought we were going to see him wheel to wheel. Who was going to take which one out? But no, that didn't happen either. A bit frustrating. But anyway, a fabulous race.
It was an half bad. And that per Zach Brown, that Zach guy, again, he's a bit relentless, isn't he? He'll go well. That Mr. Verstappen. Peter, let me ask you about the charge on Charles. Do you think over the penultimate laps that Max would have got Charles, but for the virtual safety car?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it would have got him on DRS, under braking for the turn one. Because he was near enough without DRS. So, yeah, he would have got him. And Charles wouldn't have done anything silly because he still wanted P3.
Yeah.
And from his point of view, he put up an amazing fight on a one-stop strategy with old mediums that had lost their grip a long time ago, beaten by a guy on a soft tyre, who'd done a good job with the tyre management. And that would have been it. It wouldn't have been a terrible P3 for Charles Leclerc. So, yeah, he would have got him for sure.
And then talk to me about the start. and penalties. I saw in your review video that you said the biggest injustice was the 10-second penalty that Lewis got, to which
Lewis didn't deserve a penalty for anything.
Yeah.
Ferrari should have got a fine for not giving Lewis the right information on how to pace himself relative to the cars behind when he rejoined the track. That was something to do with Lewis. How's he supposed to do that? I mean, every other team does that. I don't understand what Ferrari were thinking in not giving him that information. And no, of all the people out there who did not deserve a penalty for anything that happened, it was Lewis Hamilton. He was completely innocent in all cases. Yeah, he outbraked himself, but he wasn't involving anybody else into turn 4. But going into the first corner, though, of the race, Lewis was fabulous, wasn't he? Down the inside of Charles. Everything was set up for a really good Lewis Hamilton race. And the problem for Max was that it was Charles that he was having to sort of try and pass on the outside and not Lewis, because Charles is going to move over on you. He always does. That's one of the Charles things that he's done all his life. And it's, one day it's going to end in tears, I'm afraid. But he did it again, and Max was up on the curbs and blah, 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 and did a good job with the rejoin, I thought. But the ludicrous thing about the Lewis thing was that a few laps later at turn 4 was that Max had dive bombed him, and Max was going to give the position back to Lewis. I'm sure he was at turn 4. But Lewis didn't realise that. Maybe he was caught by surprise and just outbraked himself and went down the outside of turn 4. And that's when all the trouble started, because then Max was completely discombobulated by the whole thing, nearly took out George, as a result of which Kimi and Oliver Behrman sneaked through. It was a complete mess, really. And it all because Max was about to trying to give the position back to Lewis, starting with that silly dive bomb, which he shouldn't have done on the mediums on Lewis. That was not on that pass, in my view. And I think Max he was lucky not to get a penalty for the George thing at turn 4. And I think Charles should have got a penalty for what happened in turn 1.
I bet you get a penalty and you get a penalty. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me constructively push back on the Lewis thing. I completely agree with you. I think Lewis, 5-second penalty at best, never a 10-second.
Well, no penalty, really. As I say, this is a classic example. It's a bit like the driver of the leader of the world championship has to start the last race with a 10-place grid penalty because something's happened to his power unit, nothing to do with him. And that's wrong. The drivers get the penalty sometimes, and it's incorrect. They need to look at that. They need to look at the radio and see that Ferrari did not give Lewis the information he should have had.
I don't want to blame Lewis as the victim in this FIA ineptitude scenario. However, Peter, like when I used to kart under yellow flags, it was always the skullduggerous thing to do was to wave your hand to allow the marshals to see that, listen, I know that there's yellow flags. Meanwhile, burying your foot deep in the throttle with a view to catch the person in front. Max did something similar. I think we can argue back and forth whether Max deserved the penalty, potentially. But Max's gift is that his devilment is sufficient to where he'll make the judges, the stewards, the race director make a decision. And he did that by coming off the throttle. He gave all the places back, and apart from George. And I'd argue that Lewis should have come off the throttle and not given back the places necessarily, but at least done one of these right, a euphemistic. I know that I went down the runoff area, shouldn't have done that. Do you see me, race director? I am now allowing the guys behind me to catch up, so I have definitely not gained an advantage. Do you think there's something to that, Peter?
Well, I think you can do that if you've let people past and it's pretty obvious. But bear in mind how frenetic they are at race control. I think to try to give a signal from the cockpit to the race director about how you've tried your best to make the gap what it should be is a little bit of a stretch. I'm not sure the race director is going to have enough time to think that one through in the way he would if he just saw cars physically passing. So I'm not sure that that's right. I mean, bottom line is they don't have a Jonathan Wheatley at Ferrari, do they?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. They probably do, and he's called Jock Clear, but they don't allow him to do very much. So that's that.
Soon.
But, they don't have somebody. I always imagine Freddie Vasseur was that guy. Again, I'm slightly disappointed that he's not. But somebody should have been down there saying, our mistake, we're going to tell Lewis now, whatever, however you want to fudge it with your karting thing at Rye House, still flat out on the throttle, Cameron under the yellow flags. However you want to fudge it, make sure that, you've got somebody in race control who knows what they're talking about, who can do that. But to rely on Lewis to do that, I don't think I think that's a bit much, really, expect him to do that.
Yeah, I suppose Max did it though. If you imagine, Peter, if Max had done what Lewis did and just buried his foot in the throttle after running down the runoff area, granted he gained more places than did Lewis, but
but then GP would have been on the radio saying no, okay, go now, Lewis, go Max. It would have been managed. It wouldn't have been up to Max completely. No way. Yeah. That's the difference between Red Bull, which I always say is a fabulous racing team in general, and the rest, and Ferrari certainly, and McLaren probably, and maybe even Mercedes for that matter.
Fair cop. No, it's a shame. I'd hoped that Lewis would break his 19 race duck.
Yeah, I did too, and I think he could have been. I think he could have been right up there today. Yesterday. I think he drove really well, and he was in good shape. Again, it would have been nice to have seen him starting on medium, see what would have happened. But anyway, we never had that. Oof. I'm still shocked that Piastri was on softs at the start. I just don't get that. It didn't help him at all, as totally predicted. In the same way, it didn't help Max to be on softs in Singapore. Didn't help at all.
Yeah. You spoke about GP, Peter. I don't know if you saw the portion where GP was asking Hannah Schmitz, I guess, or another strategist on the wall, are we on?
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. I thought it was like, strategy. Okay, what are we doing about strategy? It's like this guy's, he's a much higher level of operation with Max about how to get the mediums to work and things they can try on the car. Yeah, strategy, who cares about that? We got our own team there. And I thought that was quite good. I'm sure a lot of people will give him a hard time, and I've had a few mates WhatsApp me saying, I can't believe this guy didn't know what strategy they were on. But fair enough, that's the way the race teams are today. I obviously gave Hannah a very hard time after Spain, and I gave her a hard time indirectly in Singapore as well for the tyre choice. I don't know if she was involved in that tyre choice, but certainly the Spanish thing, I think, was probably due to her or due to the strategy department. But I got to give credit to the Red Bull strategy department from Mexico, because they were absolutely spot on, lap perfect in terms of how to manage that as a one-stop strategy for Max and how to get the best out of the soft tyre. Just brilliant. Well, they didn't predict the VSC at the end. I suppose you've got to give them a failure for that. Isn't that what strategy departments are supposed to do? I think I got a lot of time for GP. I think he and Max have just got this thing where they've just got this incredible rapport. I think Max said, unless he's there on my car, I ain't staying at Red Bull, did he not? I think that's the story. And fair enough. The guy is so good. And he's so good that, what strategy? Okay, one stop, right. But give Max credit, though. What a catch in post-race, eh? To say, oh, no, that was all to do with Yuki. That was a great catch by Max. I don't know how many people were taken in by that one, but
no.
That shows how much of a racer he is too.
He's never going to throw his big
and he probably wasn't even briefed about that. He's probably thought that through himself. If I get a question about that, I'm just going to look after my mate GP.
He circles the wagons very nicely. He's never
and we shouldn't forget that happens quite a lot. And I'm not sure that I made the point in the video. It happens quite a lot, and they put it out because it is Max. But I'm not sure that sort of stuff should be out there in the public domain, because it's fairly private. We are getting access to their private radio in effect, and if they make a mistake like that, is it appropriate for Formula One just to blare that out around the world? I'm not sure that it is. And I'm the guy saying that we should have a drive to survive for the engineers and for the mechanics and for the sponsorship people and for the logistics people and maybe for the FIA even, that all these layers that we should be bringing to the surface. But I've always had the rejoinder that it's up to the director and the producer to make sure that nothing insensitive is ever put out. And that's not a difficult thing to do, in my opinion, if you understand Formula One and you can walk into the pit lane and you can sniff the air and you know what's going to happen next. Racers, I'm talking about. That's not difficult to do. For people that know nothing about Formula One, it's incredibly difficult. But here was an example of, if we did have a drive to survive for the engineering department behind the teams, that's the sort of thing that should not be put out, in my opinion. There's lots of other great stuff that should be, but not that. Not when there's a human error like that. Because we're all human and we all make mistakes. And what's the point of, capitalizing on that?
Isn't that the beauty though, Peter? For the longest time, hasn't F1 been very much us and them? We'll kind of take your money, but as far as showing any fragility or soft vulnerable underbelly or the faux pas and mistakes that happen every single race weekend,
don't get me wrong, Cameron. I'm not saying that after Barcelona we wouldn't show or shouldn't show the fight in the Red Bull debrief room about why he wasn't on soft tires. That's a valid call that was made and was a mistake and was an error, and that's the sort of thing that should be out there. I'm talking about switching on a radio switch when you shouldn't. That's what I'm talking about. It's a different thing altogether. If you make a bad call, that's great television. If you switch something on at the wrong moment, that's bad. It's probably good television, but I don't think it's good human behavior to put that out. That's what I'm saying. There's a difference. It's a subtle difference, but it's a clear difference. You see my point? You
make a good one, Peter. You do make a good one. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Ollie Behrman, shout out to him. Brilliant drive. P4 in the end. Did Ollie Behrman put forth his dissertation and principal thesis at the Mexican Grand Prix as to why he needs to be considered as the next Scuderia Ferrari F1 driver?
No, because I think he'd already done that many races before. I've got a few friends at Ferrari, and all of them are saying we've been talking a lot about Ollie for, I don't know, at least 5 months. Well, ever since Lewis has been in trouble, really, that the obvious guy to replace him is Ollie. So this is not just for me, certainly, and for, I think, a lot of people who know Ollie well and know Ferrari well, this is not a game changer because the game had already changed. I don't think there's much doubt that he is the next Ferrari driver, and he'll do incredibly well there. He's a really, really good racing driver and a great guy. What can you say? It's just wonderful to see him go so well, as I said at the start of our chat, because it's just good, isn't it? It's good when you see good drivers having a good race and having fun doing it, and it's wonderful. And I mean, the audacity of just doing what he did to the two Merc drivers, I loved it. That was sort of Nigel Mansell-esque in the early stage of his career. And yeah, you know, and look at the conversation between the Mercedes drivers and the pit wall. Part of it was all being blown away by Ollie Behrman, I think.
Yeah.
You know, that certainly has its effect on your pulse rate, I would have thought.
Just a tad.
It's so annoying that they never ask questions that actually mean anything anymore, because I would love to have known where they felt the Haas Ferrari was quicker than the Mercedes. And you probably, well, you know, it's difficult to overtake and track position. You got the track position, you know, DRS. But also there would have been bits. For sure the Haas has got some really good points now, and they've got that new floor, and they've done a really good job. Yeah. Got to hand it to them.
They are progressing. As we round third, Mr. Windsor, let me ask you about George's exchange with his engineer. At one point, he's got a McLaren driven by Oscar Piastri breathing down his neck, and he's told to look after the rears. To which he responds, "I've got a quicker car at my AWS. I don't know what you want me to do. I asked you to invert with Antonelli, and you didn't do it." People really dislike George Russell. Is that
really? I like George because he's always doing things like that. I think it's quite good.
But do you think he helps himself in the court of public opinion with those messages? Always sounds like he's having a moan, wants the inversion, wants to roll the dice on strategy, and
well, he was bleating about Max, wasn't he? He was desperate to get a penalty for Max in the first corner, wasn't he? That was the first thing. But if anybody's going to do that, it's always going to be George. I find that slightly irritating about him, that he's always trying to get somebody else in trouble. But on this thing, I kind of sympathize with him because he's, you know, since Lewis left, he's effectively the face of Mercedes in Formula One, and he's Mr. Nice Guy, and he's articulate, and he's intelligent, and I'm sure he and Toto have some very cerebral dinners and conversations and so forth. And part of that is this whole glad, happy McLaren Zach Brown thing of we're all, you know, we win and lose as a team, and we're all a team, blah, 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 aren't we wonderful? And it brings me to my point, which is that a number one driver of the ilk of George Russell should not have to ask for permission to pass, you know, a new rookie called Kimi Antonelli in the other car. Pass the guy. Don't even ask permission. What's all that about? And And that's the problem. And because they've got themselves in this mode of, oh, well, I better get permission to do this because if I have to pass him, I might have to take a small risk and we might touch and might damage the car or whatever. It's become too precious. Just get on with it and race it. You know, I think James Hunt ever asked Teddy Mayer if he could pass Jochen Mass in the other McLaren. Do you think Nigel ever asked permission to pass Nelson Piquet? You know, do you think Max would ask permission to pass Yuki Tsunoda? That's the problem. And they've got themselves in this thing of permission all the time. It's been around for quite a long time, as I've said. But that's where it's coming from, because, you know, all this, oh yeah, I better not do this until Toto gives me the okay, or whoever it is has to give them the okay. Of course they blew it, because George should have been way in front of Antonelli and shouldn't have been anywhere near. Piastri shouldn't have been anywhere near George. And Piastri's and Antonelli's job yesterday was to sort of keep Piastri away from George. That's how that race should have been run. And they completely messed it up. They will probably say, well, George should have passed him. But, you know, he's got so far down that road of being a corporate Formula One driver with a briefcase and a nice suit that he is always going to ask permission now to pass his teammate. He's not going to be a ruthless James Hunt with no shoes, sawn off jeans, a singlet T-shirt, stamping out a cigarette, climbing into a race car and blowing Jochen Mass away. He's never going to be that person. And that's the problem. You know, Mercedes need to get get George to be a lot more raw and natural, which I think it's too late to do that now. I think he's far too far down the road of being George Russell, corporate superstar. And he is a corporate superstar, and he is a fabulous racing driver. And it was a shame that his race was so blighted yesterday by all that.
George Russell, the only person not named Oscar, Max, or Lando still in contention for or at least before the Mexican Grand Prix, still in contention, which I think is worthy of note. Peter, who, to that point, and many will say that George is the driver of the season, alongside Max, Oscar, Lando, and maybe Charles throw in there. Who's been your driver of the season thus far as we kind of round third base in the 2025 season?
Well, you just listed about 5 drivers of the season, so I'd go along with that. They're all, as I said, they've all had their day. As I said before the season started, there's going to be McLaren consistency, but then there's going to be all the other teams having their day, because it's that sort of formula and we have at the moment. It's all these mysteries of how the tyres suddenly work and suddenly don't work, and nobody really understands why. Good example, Mexican Grand Prix, Max on Saturday, Max on Sunday in the soft tyres, George in Singapore. All these things are happening and the teams are moving so quickly to the next race. They don't really understand why. It comes back to my thing of it's much more difficult to know why you're quick than it is to know why you're slow. And so if you take all of that into account, you could come up with at least 5 drivers of the year, if not more, actually. I mean, why isn't Ollie Berman a driver of the year, considering the car he's driving? Why isn't Gabriel Bortoleto or Nico Hülkenberg? Yeah, there's a lot. You have to take a lot into account. But yeah, George right up there, absolutely superb when the car's great, and he's pretty good when it's not great. His time management is still fabulous, and he's another guy. You know, you got to question whether if he'd started on the medium and gone to the soft, how his race would have gone on a one-stop strategy.
It's interesting,
and that's interesting, isn't it? That none of them even thought that through and went for that option. And the only guy that did was Max. Oh, and he's the guy that did the most homework before the race. I wonder if there's any relationship there. While we were all belting around trying to get the thing to work on softs on one lap, Max was doing that long run. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, maybe that made it. Maybe we should try that next time. You know?
Correlation. What is it that they say, that correlation does not imply causation?
Well, it's hard work. It's just hard work. You think Max Verstappen enjoys going out to do an 8-lap fuel run on mediums when everybody else is out on softs on single lap runs and seeing his name as P15 on the time list or whatever they are, whatever it is? You know, he doesn't. It's hard work. But as Gary Player always said, you know, you hit 1,000 bunker shots and then one day you're going to hole it in front of the crowd on the 18th from the bunker to win a tournament. And they're all going to say, what a lucky shot. And he'll say, well, a lot of hard work in there too. And that's the point. That's the point about Max Verstappen. He puts in a massive amount of work and then he makes it look relatively easy on race day. And everyone will look back now and say, oh, look how those softs were, how good they were. Well, they're only that good because the amount of work he did on Saturday and Friday of how to drive on them with fuel in the car. And the medium, for that matter, to go back to my real point, which is how long he extended that medium stint. That was all due to his homework on Friday and Saturday.
the more shots I take, the luckier I get, isn't it, Peter? Practice.
Well, yeah,
Perfect
that
practice.
in a nutshell, yeah, you've said it much better than I, but yeah, that is correct. The harder you work, the luckier you get, and it is hard work,
Yeah, yeah.
very hard work. And Max, I think from memory, was first out of the pits in FP3, and I don't think either McLaren driver were out until sort of 10 past the hour, something like that. Maybe wrong on that, but I'm just thinking,
I mean, he gets the lap
that,
time in,
that was
doesn't he?
my impression, I think, if I think back at beginning of FP3. Now, you could say, well, what do they have to prove? They got this great car. Well, if you're Oscar Piastri, you got a lot, I'm afraid. Maybe that's all right for Lando. But if you're Oscar, you should be out there, man, having a look at what's going on in every different track condition, fuel load, everything, tires, and trying to get to the bottom of why you're not feeling the surface of the road, which is actually what's happening with Oscar. He's not feeling the surface of the road, and he's trying to drive quickly in a sort of Lando-esque way of braking late, turning in late, getting on the power early. And that's not, ultimately, I don't think that's his natural way of driving. I think it's become his default way of driving this year to beat Lando, but I don't think it's his natural way. And he's got now to go back to his natural feel for the car.
Go on, then, Mr. Windsor. You've been too generous with your time as always. As we round third, my final question is this: to save a dying puppy, who are you picking the Drivers' Championship in 2025?
Lando Norris,
Oh,
because I love puppies, and that's the softest option, I think. And I don't want to, I want to save that puppy. But I'd love to see Max do it. And if we're getting that excited about Max maybe finishing second in Mexico, imagine what it'd be like if he actually won the World Championship. Imagine what that would be for the sport, for the money, for liberty, for Wall Street, for everything. But also because Max is a very, very good racing driver, it would be totally just. Having said that, Lando and Oscar have gone through the ups and downs at McLaren, the growing pains at McLaren in Lando's case, certainly. Oscar slightly less so. But both of them have had their days, and both of them have driven beautifully to win Grand Prix. So both of them deserving world champions, whichever way it falls for them. So I don't really have any feel either way about that. I think they're both deserving. Although I think this patch that Oscar's going through is starting to put a little bit of shadow over everything he's done so far. And he really needs to get out of the funk and get on with it.
Mr. Windsor, it's going to be interesting. That's my prediction. I think it'll go close.
Well, you want it to go close because that's good for business, isn't it, for everybody? But,
I mean, it's a rising Max Verstappen tide floats all F1 boats. The longer that he can keep the McLaren boys honest, the better.
But you could argue that it's already lost, because really for him to be world champion, he needed to just have perfect weekend after perfect weekend, and McLaren's to have problems and be ahead of both McLarens in effect. And that wasn't the case in Mexico, was it? I mean, Lando got his points and Max was only third, and it wasn't a perfect weekend. And I think probably already now it's become too big an ask for Max. That's my gut feeling.
But I mean, some said similar at Zandvoort when the delta was 104 points, right? If Max can eat into Oscar's lead 64 points over the course of 4 or 5 races, surely 33 or whatever it is now, like, I don't know. Stranger things have happened, Peter. I don't know.
Well, they have. I just think if Max had won Mexico as he won Austin with Lando or Oscar second, then I think you'd be feeling, wow, we're on the ship now. This is it. It's going in that direction. There's the goal. But to me, this was a bit of a wind blowing, colder wind coming in. And the fragrance of the wind is this, orange papaya, and it's going to be very difficult for Max to continue to continue the momentum that he's had and to win races the way he has. I don't think finishing third is going to be good enough for him.
No, he's gonna need fortuitous circumstance. In order for Max to win it, the racing gods will
Not
need
so
to
much
smile
fortuitous.
down.
What he describes as a perfect weekend when they get the best from the car. They give him a great car. He will always outqualify the McLarens. And generally speaking, if he can do that, he's going to win the race. Generally speaking, it's a big generalization, obviously. But for a team that have done such a good job with the car in recent races, how did they get it so wrong in Mexico? P5. You got to think that through. They're capable of doing that. They're capable of doing that again at other circuits. So that just shows how on edge that Red Bull is, and it's not as good as a McLaren. And when you show it thinner air, which accentuates more the effectiveness of the aero package on the cars, the Red Bull is on such a knife edge. They got such a small sweet spot of operation that if Pirelli bring the two medium and soft so close, they're stuffed. And that's what happened, I think. I think it was just the thin air of Mexico. Now, maybe that differentiation isn't going to show through in the remaining races, but it's a reminder of how much better the McLaren is than the Red Bull. And you got two very quick drivers in a very, very good McLaren against one brilliant driver in a not so good Red Bull. Pretty good, much better than it was, but it's not as good as a McLaren. And that's the battle that is ahead of us.
Mr. Windsor, how do you like yourself so much? What a time to be an F1 fan, eh? Peak F1 fan, some people are saying. Peter, you've been a legend as per usual. I appreciate your God tier, market leading purple sector insight ad nauseum, genuinely. If you enjoy, like me, Mr. Windsor's God tier level of F1 insight and soliloquy, and you are not subscribed to the channel, then what are you doing with your life? Shortly thereafter, if you ingest all your F1 content by dint of your favourite podcast platform, Short Corners Podcast by Peter Windsor is the pick to click. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, do me a favour, like, comment and subscribe. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, 5 stars and a follow would not go amiss. Mr. Windsor, you're a legend as per usual. I appreciate you as always, good sir. Between now and next time, gang, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.